All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. My name is Eric. I am the VP of School Partnerships here at MathTrack Institute, along with our co-founder and CEO, Dr. Kevin Berkopes. And just a couple of quick housekeeping items before we begin today. The session will be recorded, and all guests will be sent the recording in the next few days. There will be a couple of times today for you to contribute your thoughts, especially at the beginning. Please do engage and provide your feedback. In just a little bit, the first question is going to be for you to post an emoji that describes how you're feeling about yourself today and just kind of how you're feeling in general. So think about what emoji describes you right now. If you have any questions throughout, please feel free to share those questions in the Q&A. There may be times when we respond to them. And then finally, and last but certainly not least, we have our host today, Dr. Kevin Berkopes.
Hey everybody, just want to make sure and do a level check. So can everybody see the presentation screen? And okay, awesome. So what I'm going to do is, if it's all right, and I would like to have it more of a dialogue, but the goal of today is to talk through and then kind of help further understand for everybody that's with us today is what the growth framework is and how it works for mathematics educators. So if you get a chance, post an emoji how you're feeling today. I know it's a Wednesday, and also a kind of core objective, something that I always like to do is when we're having conversations, I like to know what you'd like to get out of our time together today. So if you could go ahead and do that, and then we'll get started here. I'll give you a couple seconds to post that in the chat. Give you a few minutes to put that in, and then we'll go forward.
And it sounds like the chat may be disabled. I don't know if there's a way to change that on the fly or not. You can see mine though, a little sleepy on a Wednesday.
Yep, that's the only one I see. That's all right. Okay, so working through, let me get this up. So a little bit about me. My background for a lot of you is understood, and otherwise is I was a classroom teacher. Went to academia with the idea of impacting the things that I really cared about, which was in my classroom experiences, which was everything from third grade to high school calculus in the K-12 setting. Actually, kindergarten was the lowest grade I did, but that was a short stint of hand-holding and taking kids to the restrooms. The academic side of me is a research mathematician, but what I wanted to apply the technology and otherwise to was understanding the complexity of classrooms, and then how can we train people that are really passionate about doing this work so that all of our communities have quality educators. The underlying thesis is that teachers are one of the most vital assets to every community, and how that works. MathTrack Institute, which is the institute that we founded to do this work, is a distance learning institution. What that means is that we want to combine the idea of being and making higher ed accessible, but making it accessible through also the work that you're doing. So the idea of, can you get college credit from the work of teaching while training for that work to evolve your expertise and capacity? That's what MathTrack is really all about. And we have 3 programs that we offer with our school partners. We have the Alternative Math Teacher Certification, that's a transition to teaching or alternative licensure program, where we can directly license in Indiana, Arkansas, and West Virginia. We also have reciprocity agreements in place that allows us to work with most states in the US. We have a PD program, which is the idea of studying the work of mathematics for teaching and understanding how to take what level of expertise that you have and taking that forward And then the apprenticeship to degree and licensure is a program designed around the idea that there are a lot of paraprofessionals and otherwise in the community that are doing the work of teaching, but they're not getting paid to do that work because they lack an accredited degree and a license. And this is a program that expedites the ability to get a bachelor's degree while studying mathematics and applied mathematics for teaching, and also getting a license in an expedited and time sensitive, I like to say, but also resource sensitive way. It's about a tenth of the cost of what you would have to pursue in a traditional sense. So that's us, that's our programming. What we're going to talk about today, and you can interrupt me at any time throughout the conversation, is two parts. So the first part is about understanding what it is that is required to become a great math teacher. Growth has a particular framework that allows us to understand that the prerequisites of becoming a math educator or to be an applied mathematics professional may be different than what others are expecting or believe. And part two is, how can we actually do this work together? All of our programs that I mentioned just a minute ago are based on the growth framework. So it's studying mathematics for teaching as a part of your growth and development for alternative licensure, for professional development, and for a bachelor's program that results in a degree in licensure through apprenticeship. So those are the two parts. I've got a little bit of interaction on the next slide. So one of the ways that I'd like you to think about that is, if you have a mobile device, there's a QR code on your screen. And what it'll allow you to do is answer this question by, putting a couple of words or thoughts into, and then what I'm going to show you is how that will automatically generate here. And so the first question is, what are, as you stand and sit here today, the prerequisites of someone being a great math teacher at your school or in your community? So if you could put those thoughts in real quick, they'll auto-generate here, and I'll do the same. And let's see if we can get a conversation started. So I'll give you a few minutes to put those things in, and then hopefully it'll spark a little bit of a conversation before we move forward. So it looks like most of you contributed. Thank you. The things that I'm reading, and this is part of a conversation that we could have as the dialogue that goes throughout, is what I notice is some words that maybe have deep meaning, but possibly different meanings. So the ones that are the intangibles of a teacher, like choosing to be there, mistakes lead to growth is actually a teacher tactic or pedagogy, but they want to make an impact, they're patient, they enjoy students, and that all students can learn. These are skill sets of individuals that likely that are choosing to teach have. The knowledgeable and good examples and other things are what a person that likely has these prerequisites or intangibles for being a great educator, which means to us that you choose to be there. You're good with kids, or you want to be good with kids, which is one of the prerequisites of that. And that teaching is a pathway for you, that is a career that you can see a pathway to enjoy. If you have those prerequisites in place, we believe you can be not only a good math educator, but a tremendous one. And when I've done this poll and in the past presentations that I've had, I can honestly say very rarely have I ever seen anything like they need to be a great mathematician or they need to have X, Y, and Z in terms of skill sets. There are skill sets that are mathematics for teaching that are required, but usually it's the intangibles that make the great teacher that has the sticking power in your school, which is something that I wanted to sort of show and utilize. So let's do one more. what are the mindsets of being a great math teacher? So a mindset is some of the things that you put in the previous poll. And let me switch over to that one. So the mindsets, again, this QR code, and it's going to show you on the screen, or you can use this one. The mindsets are slightly different than the prerequisites. So the mindset is what you bring to teaching, something that is what is required to be a quality educator, and how that would look. I'll pause for just a second, and then we'll move forward. So typical results, and I left the previous results up to make a comparison between the two as sort of a word collaborative cloud, is that the mindsets that you bring to teaching are often about the ability of a student, or the growth capability of a student. Neuroscience and otherwise research behind human beings and their capacity is that we're all basically born with the same capacity in terms of brain and development. And the exposure that we have to great teaching, to social determinants of learning or health, and otherwise what you have in your home and what you have access to, fundamentally shift the capacity as people go through their formative years and into even adulthood, who you're exposed to, and the network of friends that you have, or otherwise your network professionally, impacts how you continue to develop and grow. So the mindset often of a great teacher is the things that you would read, right? It's instilling confidence, being patient, understanding growth mindset and what it means to make mistakes, using mistakes for growth, and privileging the idea of risk-taking to make mistakes. Mistakes are part of learning. In fact, they're one of the most valuable things of learning. But we often set up classrooms where mistakes are something that instills fear, rather than something that is embodied as a growth metric for learning and development. So getting back to the presentation, this is the growth framework as it stands for how we substructure all of our different programs. It's the framework for thinking about what is the most vital and important things to, one, respect the expertise that a teacher brings to the table. These could be net new, very novice educators, to those that have been in the discipline for 20, 30 years. And so when you're training and developing the capacity of an educator, the way we think about it is that you have to respect the amount of expertise that they bring, and also the amount of expertise that frankly is different. Some are more knowledgeable about kids and development. Some are more knowledgeable about mathematics, but have a difficult time transferring that into consumable information. Some are both exceptionally good at either. These types of expertise, what growth allows us to do is to provide a framework for wherever a teacher is at, to, one, respect her, but also, two, give the development of growth for learning more about the math that you're teaching. That's one of the most vital things, is knowing a concept differently as a teacher, rather than the utility of being able to use it as a tool. That's a skill that all teachers need, and is often not covered in traditional education or otherwise ways of developing teacher talent. So I'm going to go through each one of the facets of growth. There's the individual examination, that's the orange there. That's the G part of growth, which I'll get into what grasp the meaning means. And then there's a collective understanding, which talks about the broader discipline of mathematics and the coherence and the interconnectedness of these concepts. And then the local understanding is that you do not ever get the opportunity to teach in an isolated way. How mathematics is talked about with your students, be it in your classroom or other teachers' classrooms or in their homes or in the community. And these all have an impact on how students learn and develop these skill sets. So we'll start with grasp the meaning. And like I said, you can interrupt at any time. I'm sure Eric will alert me if there's an interruption or if anybody has a particular question. So grasp the meaning of growth is about the art of knowing mathematics. So knowing a teaching concept is different from knowing a concept as a tool. What I mean is there's a difference for what a teacher needs to know. Yes, she has to be able to perform the operations of long division, but there's a lot more to know about that concept that can be developed over time. And some of the best ways to develop that is to, one, be aware that there is more to know than the procedural knowledge of the concept, but also how do you analyze and develop and build it? And so part of the growth framework is that we give you real skills on how to do that and expose you to ways of thinking about the concept that maybe in the past you've not been exposed to. So if we were doing this together in the art of knowing, we would pick a concept like subtraction and we would start to ask questions. And we have some artifacts within our frameworks that allows you to record these ideas and build them out over time. So one of the ways of asking a question is, what are all the ways that we know a concept like subtraction? And these are words or phrases that we typically associate with that mathematical concept. So just some ideas of sparking for all of you. The way that would work is subtraction can be known as minusing. It can be known as taking away, cutting off, reducing, measuring in size, comparing. These are words that are in text or otherwise in the curriculum that refer to this operation that we do on various number sets. But when we're talking about it, these words serve different purposes in different contexts as subtraction increases in complexity over time. So how do we talk about it? What are the words and actions? Cutting off, taking away. These things are really valuable until taking away doesn't work anymore. So getting as the first experience of grasping the meaning is trying to get all the ideas that you have today. And it could be a very long list for the mathematics topics that you have experience teaching. It can be very short too. Oftentimes in our exposure to these things, we have kind of one phrase that teaches a particular concept. And what we're going to show you, I hope, in an empathetic way, is that one phrase is going to lead to a contradiction at some point. And a contradiction allows for misconceptions for students because they'll say, but you said subtraction was takeaway. And now you're saying that when I take away a negative, that something else has to happen and I have to add. And so they start to label the idea of a concept based on the words that we use to teach it as being phony or magical or stuff I have to memorize that doesn't make any sense. And it robs the discipline that I love. Of course, if you are wanting to teach mathematics, you would love it too. It robs it of some of the coherence that is really there because the human language to describe these things, as it is with anything, is limited. And so then you start to be able to ask, all right, now I kind of have an idea, a general theme of what subtraction is. And that general theme means it has relationships with other concepts that I teach. And something fun to think about and interact around, like what we do in our programming, is asking questions about its relationship with other topics. So one way to know subtraction is to describe it as repeated division, or excuse me, division is repeated subtraction. So division is this idea of taking away until you run out of stuff. So can you say that division and subtraction are the same thing? And going through and trying to unpack that as a thought exercise about this topic gives you a depth and breadth of understanding of why these things are hard for young people to learn, that potentially just being able to do it and know it through the procedural side of things isn't going to give you the ability to teach it better. And that's the idea of grasp the meaning. And like I said, if you have questions on each of the individuals, maybe you can put them in the the chat, or Eric can alert me that there's a question, and I'll direct it and answer it immediately. So the next is when we move into this coherence of the broader system of mathematics. And the first one is R, which is reveal the horizon. And what we like to call this is mathematics peripheral vision. So it's the idea of seeing not just what you're doing in front of you, but also what happens before and after and to the sides. So if you think about peripheral vision, or the horizon, or the landscape of this concept, then you know that the teachers that came before you taught it in some way, like subtraction, and the teachers that come after you will be talking about it as well. And so how can you understand where they've come from and also prepare them for the way it's going to be talked about in the future by the way that you talk about it now? And that's the reveal the horizon. So how would you actually go through a process of revealing the horizon, which is called horizon knowledge and research about a particular concept? And these are some of the key questions that you would go through our process and be able to answer. So one is, why are students even learning subtraction at the point that you are? Or pick any other concept. Why does multiplication happen when it happens? And why is it applied to various number sets in increasing size at time intervals over the elementary curriculum? Why does multiplication happen in algebra where it happens? These are extremely dense and well thought out curriculums and scopes. There's a good reason why they happen where they have, and it's a good idea for a teacher to be aware of that, and then to think critically and otherwise understand the design of what text she's teaching from, or why it shows up that it does, and why do we test kids starting at 9 years old with standardized tests. In mathematics, it's actually quite easy to understand beyond maturity, is that there's a certain amount of concepts that are now changing as the application gets more robust. And that's the time when we set a baseline for standardized assessments in the US. Next things they would be like is what came before and what are relevant for learning this topic. So if you use subtraction as an operation on numbers, then you would necessarily connect it to adding. So how does this addition and subtraction relate? And what's the comparison between the two? Can you do addition without subtraction? Can you talk about them in the same way? If one is adding, plussing, combining, and the other is dividing, minusing, reducing, are they actually the same thing, just in a sort of opposite approach? Is there a reason that we call addition and subtraction opposite operations? Is that really a useful term for students? What do they know about opposites and the language that we would use? Another thing is, what does understanding of this topic do for me as a teacher for connecting and building to later topics? So if you know addition is something that you're teaching in the beginning of the year, or subtraction, and you also know that the operations of multiplication and division are going to be taught later, then you can understand that the early conceptions of multiplication is repeated addition. So you can't conceptualize what that is as a student unless you know what addition is. And then doing the same addition over and over again is one great way of talking about multiplication, but it won't really land the way that you hope it will if they don't have a good conception of what you're teaching them at the beginning with that operation. So that would be a reveal the horizon. It's this idea of peripheral vision for the concept that you're trying to study as a teacher. The next is observe the implications. So understanding in various ways, developing a maturity about these concepts under or substructs this idea that at certain points, the way we talk about things breaks. It breaks because it's very hard to have one phrase that represents something in mathematics that evolves in such complexity over time. So if you think about the idea of multiplication of single-digit numbers compared to multi-digit numbers and algorithms that we apply to that, compared to how we would use it in algebra, which is the multiplication and repeated addition of unknown quantities, and then how we would use it in calculus and differential equations, how we would use it in abstract algebra with rings and groups. This application of multiplication gets much more sophisticated over time. And so observing the implications is about, one, being aware of the evolution of sophistication, but also talking explicitly about how something might break when you're talking with kids. So easy sort of examples would be what breaks when we're talking about subtraction. Some of the easiest ways of talking about subtraction of when it breaks is, how do you take away nothing? So we introduced the idea of zero, and what does it mean to take away nothing? In one way you would say, well, then it stays the same. Well, what stays the same? And why would you even do a subtraction if you were taking away nothing? And these questions is applied to number sets as they increase from whole numbers to natural, which includes zero, to integers, which gets even more weird. Why would you take away a negative quantity? When would that ever be useful? And why is it that when you use subtraction as a takeaway that you actually end up adding to the quantity that was a negative? And then you start to think, what does it mean to take away a negative quantity? And when would I ever apply that? This break is a natural break that happens, frankly, integers get introduced by 4th grade and really get introduced by 6th grade. So we're talking about 9 to 12-year-olds that are dealing with things that only elite human beings in the past ever got to deal with. Integers as a negative quantity didn't really become useful until we developed very sophisticated systems of commerce and debt. We used standardized measurement systems for weather, temperature, sea levels, right? At a meta level, you don't actually need to know these things. It's like the ocean's above me or below me. It depends on where you're at. But at a meta level, as we start to talk about this is 2,000 meters below sea level, then you would say negative 2,000, only if the reference point was well understood across, human cultures. So the rules and constraints for these particular things that you would study in math, they are the reasons that things break. And they're also the reasons that the language we use breaks. The coherent system of mathematics doesn't break down. It's the language that we use that changes over time in our ability to use language and use words and descriptors and metaphors, really. And then you start to talk about, when does it break down to talk about repeated subtraction and division? Is it true that you can say repeated subtraction of negative quantities when you're talking about division of -4? Why is the answer -3 when you take 12 divided by -4? That's a very strange concept that you would either teach through rule making, which is memorization, or you would teach through conceptually trying to understand why it's useful. You as a teacher may never have gotten a chance to study that. And in fact, it's probably one of the more exciting ways to think about what usually people think are mundane topics. Subtraction is incredibly difficult. The idea of zero is incredibly difficult to grasp. And you as a teacher get a chance through the growth framework to actually study these things for the nuance that they provide, the language problems that we have for describing them, but also the beauty behind this human endeavor of creating mathematics as a coherent system over the last 40, 50,000 years of human existence. Okay, so weave is one of my favorites. I'm biased. The reason that weave together concepts is one of my favorites is because I believe that teachers are storytellers. And what I want weave to be understood is a couple of things. On the screen, you see a word or phrase that's from neuroscience called narrative transport. So if you've ever taught and you feel like everyone in your class, which the probability of this is very low, but you feel like all the students in your class are on the same page, there's actually research, neuroscience research over the last 3 or 4 years that shows that the brain waves of an audience, when a story is being told, synchronize. And they actually fire between different facets of the brain, the frontal cortex, all of these different parts. They fire in different ways, but when there is a story happening, often when there's a personal story happening, narrative transport allows for the synchronization of brain waves. Think about that. So independent, autonomous human beings with the most complex brains that have ever evolved in a room together listening to one person or one story, their brain waves synchronize. So that's getting everyone on the same page. Teachers do that all the time, and I believe they tell stories about their content. And so Weave Together is about becoming the best mathematics storyteller possible by giving you access to some of the cool stories about those concepts. To give an example, we want you to be a storyteller and narrator, then you should know context and sort of what makes the plot good, right? So one of those is asking the question, what is this topic useful for? Or what would the world look like without it? Could you fathom a world where subtraction wasn't possible? And going through that exercise together with others or with our team really helps you develop sort of like, because you can ask this to a 9-year-old, like, okay, rest of the day, nobody can do subtraction, right? And oftentimes when we talk about time or mathematics or numbers, we run into these sort of like, well, I don't know why I'm learning this. And it's like, well, what would the day look like if you couldn't tell time? And that question really brings about the importance and somewhat of the automated understanding that math is ubiquitous throughout our entire existence, day to day. But it's also the numbers on our screen that are telling you that this is the 16th slide, or the time that is allotted for this presentation, and you all have taken out of your day to listen and interact. These are topics and otherwise what the world would look like if we hadn't invented these things, and now teaching our youth to be able to use them flexibly. Why is it relevant or interesting is another question as far as how that would develop. When was it invented? That's a mindset that a lot of people don't carry into mathematics, is that it was actually invented by people over time for reasons. Why would subtraction have been invented? Well, when I give you something, it's taking away from the quantity that I have. How do I describe that I started with 3 cats and now I only have 2? Well, you got to give it away. And giving away is a reduction of the quantity that you have. Now you have subtraction. If you're giving away nothing as applied to cats, you probably wouldn't talk about it. But if you're giving away commerce, money, goods and services, land, all the other things that went into the original application of this, 40,000 years ago, we had records of people counting and using sophisticated counting numbers in certain ways. And it was about keeping tracks of quantities that you can't keep on your fingers or other tools that were available. So these invented ways of doing things gives you the context and sort of the historical place and time to tell these stories. And they're quite fascinating when you get a chance to dig into them. And then, you know, just the general idea of interest. So that's Weave. It's about narrating and as I like to say, it's the curious case of being a storyteller for mathematics. A lot of people that have a fear of STEM and mathematical disciplines, they often self-report as being literacy. I'm a language person, I'm this, I'm that. Well, one, math is a language. And 2, if you're a storyteller and a literacy person, then you're going to be a great math teacher. You just got to tell the stories about mathematics, which means you need to do the research as a teacher to talk about your topics and tell stories about them authentically with students and with each other.
And Kevin, we did have a question come in. It's an interesting one. I think this came in towards the end of Observe the Implications. The question is, how do you tease out a student's misunderstanding without waiting for them to fail or get upset or hopeless that they've made a mistake?
So one way to tease it out is that in sort of the first 3, so grasping peripheral knowledge and observing the implications, is that you're trying to uncover, and this comes a little bit later too, is common misconceptions. A lot of the new, over the last 10 or 15 years, the textbooks that we have in the curriculum available, they often give common misconceptions for particular topics. But this is something that you can obviously talk about through, one, your own experience, but you can also talk about with other teachers about when do kids typically trip up on this particular topic. So common misconceptions will be a part of your development of each individual concept. And you want to tease them out as being ready to see it when it happens with students, because that gives you the sort of dynamic moment-to-moment ability to react. But if you can be prepared for that, it's not about seeing it ahead of time and giving the perfect presentation that would eliminate that misconception. It's about hoping that a mistake does happen so that you can point it out to the rest of the class or the other students by saying, this is a really smart way of going about this. Maybe we can discuss why there was a breakdown in the process of. And that allows you to take a mistake and turn it into a learning experience rather than a mistake of a student and turning it into something they're embarrassed about. The biggest differences between US classrooms and other classrooms that happen across the world that are often ranked very far ahead in performance in mathematics than the US is that mistake making becomes one of the major things that is allowable and privileged or rewarded as great creative and thoughtful behavior. That's something that has to be modeled by a teacher that believes it. So it's this idea of using mistakes, which was on one of the first word clouds, is the mistakes that are made. If you can model the behavior at the very beginning of you setting the culture of your classroom, that mistakes are allowed, and not only that, they're courageous in trying something that's new. Nobody that ever tries anything new does it perfectly the first time. And if you can build that culture while simultaneously recognizing the types of mistakes that are typically made and calling them out in a productive way, then you're going to be way ahead comparatively to preparing as people like to say, the perfect lecture that will allow for no misconceptions. The only thing about a perfect lecture that I know is, one, they don't exist, and two, it's likely true that you have created a perfect lecture, and this actually is validated in research, is that, or a perfect set of experiences, is that you're giving a false sense of, I've learned a tremendous amount to your students. So there was a research article that came out of Stanford that talked about this well-prepared lecture or a well-prepared inquiry-based and mistake allowing session, or a small video about the topic and its utility, and then allowing kids to kind of play with problems and tasks so that they kind of see the value behind what they're going to be learning. And the students that came out of the perfect lecture had a way higher overinflated sense of what they had learned. And they had a false sense of confidence of what they had learned. And so preparing for, removing all misconceptions actually leads to that. Whereas allowing mistake making to happen allows for a very tremendous set or sequence of learning. Okay, so teaching with peers, and the last one, hearing your students, are about the localized collectives that you can involve in your study and development of mathematics for teaching. Your peers are the teachers around you and the parents and others, and there's ways of thinking about the utility of what they say and utilizing information that a fourth grade teacher could share with you. If you're a middle school teacher, then they are preparing students as they kind of traverse through the journey of learning in the early grades. And that collective is how math is defined in your school or your district. So you need to be able to talk to different groups. And as we've done conversations, and I've worked with, at this point, thousands of schools and districts, it's typically that the elementary school teachers never even know who the middle school teachers are. Middle school doesn't, or rarely knows, who the high school teachers are. And the high school teachers and the middle school teachers and the elementary school teachers don't get a chance to share their expertise for the mathematics that they talk about with each other, with an understanding that there's various degrees of knowledgeability and student learning, and that we all can benefit from that conversation. So teaching with peers is about, how do you develop those sort of band of brothers, is how I like to describe it. Your peers in a way that is very deep and well understood is that teachers understand teachers. Outside of the discipline, it's hard to understand what it's really like to be in a classroom full of 35 seventh graders 7 times a day. If you've ever been through that, it's not for the faint-hearted. Myself included, in several of my jobs, my class sizes were typically 32 to 35. I would teach 7 classes a day, usually with one maybe prep course and a 20-minute lunch that I would run around and eat food while like monitoring a hallway or something. That type of job, working with young people, really makes a collegial set of which these are your people and these individuals that are teaching these concepts. You need to be able to talk and work together. So easy sets of questions, because it may be a little bit scary for an elementary school teacher to talk to the high school calculus teacher. Unfortunately, maybe the high school calculus teacher brings that on herself by how she presents her capabilities to the elementary school teachers. Maybe not. But these are a set of questions that should a somewhat, or experience that should eliminate that and allow for collaboration to happen. So how and what language do you use to talk about, and then we're, in a situation like we're talking about subtraction, is, hey, algebra teacher, how do you talk about subtraction in your class? And he may say, I don't. It's part of equations. It's something that happens. Okay, well, let's talk about how we talk about subtraction in the elementary. It's about taking away, it's minusing. Do you use that language with your students? Maybe not. How could we? How do you talk about it? And then that cross sort of development is what the student experiences, but a teacher isolated in their own classroom doesn't get to access to what that journey feels like. And that's often where a lot of the misconceptions happen. So we want to eliminate those. How does what I'm teaching in earlier grades or middle school change what you're teaching? Or what are the things that frustrate you the most about this topic? When students come to you, they'll say things like, well, none of them can do anything with fractions. Okay, let's be more specific. Where do they have their difficulties with fractions? And how is that something that maybe at my level that I can address? Common denominators, why do we need those? Well, that's something that earlier grades can work on, only if they can hear these misconceptions that happen in later grades, or otherwise how a teacher that's in 2nd grade would talk about that concept could be used in later grades as shared language for something that a student has experienced. So that's why the Band of Brothers idea is that they're your people. We need to get together and talk about these things authentically and develop them together. And then the idea of labeling the struggle is mathematics and all learning is hard. And one, it should be okay that it is, because it's one of the purest pursuits when we have as complex brains as we have. It's a tool that can, for the time you're born to the time that you move on, can continuously develop in its ability to think and associate and understand. So let's talk about the fact that it's hard, and that it's hard is a good thing. And that developing these capacities as habits of intellectual being is different than getting a long division question correct. Useful, but the endeavor of growth and the struggle for and the grit that comes from are all habits and intellectual ways of being that we can share with students and each other, really, because the work of teaching is not easy either. And being able to share that with each other is important. Okay, I'm going to finish up here with your students. I hear all the time about data and technology in the classroom and data collection and strategy for use, and why and how we can use student information and performance on assessments to inform our practice. The best data collecting mechanism and the best strategy for use is an informed teacher. There's no technology that can replace the dynamic approach to a well-informed expert educator listening to students and predicting and otherwise using the mistakes in real time as learning. Not only that, it's that behavior that you want to see is modeled by how the teacher would take in that information and react to it. So an educator in our position about hearing students is that you're trying to cultivate these sort of mindsets, which can't be learned by memorizing the top 10 ways to have growth mindset. Growth mindset is learned through modeled behavior. And modeled behavior, the most powerful position in the classroom is a empathetic and learned educator. The adult in the room models the behavior of which she wants to see. And that can be really hard because there's other models of behaviors that happen for students all the time. That's why they give us some classroom behaviors from time to time. And receiving that and modeling the intellectual behavior that you want to see within your discipline, but also at large as a human, requires a well-tuned educator to hear what your students are telling you. And they'll tell you a lot. They'll tell you a lot by their behavior, of how they show up in your classroom, about how things are going for them emotionally and social emotionally, which changes by the minute, as you all know. But also they'll tell you a lot about how they think about the purpose and utility of learning and about your discipline of mathematics and otherwise, and its benefit to them. They'll have a lot of contradictions built around false narratives of mathematics utility. It's not about plussing and minusing and arithmetic. It's about this ability to take in information, be courageous and understanding and creative in problem solving, and applying that to various facets where you're courageous enough to make a mistake to learn. And that's math to me and to our team is one of the purest disciplines to be able to ubiquitously offer that to our human ecosystems and communities. This may address also the question that happened earlier, Eric, is if we can predict what students are making in terms of mistakes, this is where we would talk about that in the framework. And that predictive mechanism ahead of time, again, isn't about strategy for creating the perfect lecture. It's about the strategy for how to allow a mistake to happen and use it as an advantage to the learning environment in your classroom, and be able to model really productive learning behaviors with your students. So kind of wrapping up to see if there's a Q&A or otherwise here at the end, and getting you all back to your busy days. The idea of the growth framework is to take, I like to think of this as whatever you think about a mathematical concept now is sort of in the middle. And to become the best teacher that you possibly can, one, you should understand that you can always learn more about any concept. I've probably studied more mathematics than most people, and there are still things about every concept that can stretch my meaning of that concept and my ability to talk about it outward to a bigger bubble, a bigger understanding, a more robust and rigorous set of tools, so that I can then turn back and invest that deep understanding of these topics into the learning of relative novices. That unpacking for kids and students only happens when you have developed a more robust understanding of how to talk about it, because it builds empathy for the struggle of learning with students. It should be very rare that a teacher that has this very robust understanding of mathematical topics to ever say something to a kid like, why don't you know this yet? Why can't you do this? This is something you learned in 4th grade. If they had learned it in 4th grade, they wouldn't be struggling with it right now. So, the empathy of understanding the struggle and the life cycle of learning over time. One is that if you are a great educator, you can catch a kid up 3-4 years of which they are behind in a matter of a few weeks, because they finally are ready. And maybe you're the right person for that. And that's often missing in the paradigm for teachers, is sometimes timing matters for learning. And maybe it's your time and you're the one that can really help young people develop very quickly and overcome some of the self-efficacy stuff that they've maybe had since 3rd grade. We do that for adults all the time. They talk about themselves in disparaging ways. And it's because of some experience in 3rd grade with their 3rd grade teacher. And now they're, a professional, successful adult, and they're like, I don't know, I can't do this. And the idea is, who told you that? Because they lied. Sorry. But now's the time, and maybe you're ready. And if you are wanting to be a teacher, we hope that you're ready, and that you work with us to develop that capacity through our frameworks. So I'll just be very quick on this. PD is done through our platform, and it's done on the foundational topics. So we give you the ability to study these, what we call foundations, which are number and operation and place value and counting and shapes and geometry and measurement and probability. all of these you get to study through the growth framework in the way that I just took you through. And the idea is that with the foundational topics in place, and you've gone through these growth experiences for each, you could literally teach everything in K through 12, because even at the high school level, about 60–70% of algebra, algebra 2, and geometry courses are what came from the foundational topics of the K through 6, K through 7. So the idea of foundational topics is our best effort to set you up to be able to feel confident in your approach to these topics, but also take the framing of what you went through and to do that to any topic that you find yourself teaching that you want to evolve your understanding of. These are the artifacts I talked about, a way of writing down, as created by our team, some of these experiences. So getting ideas out of your head and really thinking and getting them into an artifact like this is super beneficial. In the same way, those that like to do journaling or otherwise, writing things, talking about it, putting it on paper, drawing it, these are ways that humans learn a lot more. And sometimes what we know is tacit. So you don't know what you know. So getting it out of your head and then examining it is part of the growth framework as well. And then we have this Master Professional program. This is about training the trainer, which means master teachers are so valuable to their local context if and when they are asked to train other educators. And so we have an NAEA certified or otherwise standards aligned program that equips you to, one, be an expert on growth, but then use growth with your peers as a way of developing their capacity in a PD sense. If you're the local expert for mathematics, this is now a tool that you can use with your fellow teachers through the PD programs that your administrators often will ask you to do. We want to give you a framework of which to work through that is developed over research and really brings together cognitive science, neuroscience, math education, and mathematics research into one framework to study math for teaching. Rather than telling you how to teach, we want you to know more about the topics that you teach so that you tell better stories. Okay, questions? Anything in the chat? Eric, you're gonna have to curate. And if there are any questions, if not, then I really want to thank you for participating and listening. And if you have follow-up questions, we can provide all of our contact information through the webinar links in a follow-up email asking how good or bad you felt like it went and how I can improve, because I would love to know any ways to improve to tell this story and help others experience the framework and the growth experience, but in their localized context so they can do the best work possible for their students in their community.
Yeah, as you have questions, feel free to post them in the Q&A. Otherwise, just like Kevin said, I want to thank you for your time today. The slides and the recording will be sent after this video as well. We do have one more question. Thoughts on intentional mistakes to humanize yourself to students? What are your thoughts on that, Kevin?
Well, one is you are very lucky if you have to actually make an intentional mistake, because I make mistakes all the time and they're not intentional. But it is a great way of presenting a mathematical topic to students where a common mistake that you've predicted ahead of time, and showing it to the students and saying, there's a mistake here. I need you all to help me find it. And it is a great tactic for teaching when you can predict ahead of time some of the most common errors, which can come from the collaboration with other teachers. Like they will often talk about, kids cannot do arithmetic with fractions with different denominators. Okay, well, let's put where we add two fractions and we add the numerators and the denominators together and put that up on the board as a point of discussion as to why it isn't potentially correct. And then you can have them draw out what it looks like in a model. This is why this isn't potentially correct, that this piece and this piece don't make this piece, and kind of go from there.
Yeah, I had another question. How do you build the relationship with peers? I find it hard if the teachers aren't in the same building.
So there's two parts of that question that I heard. So let me explain, and maybe that'll give more context as to how I would answer it. Relationship building through rectangles, like what we're on now, is hard. It's not impossible. And over the last 4 years, since what happened in 2020 and to now, we have a better ability to connect with sophisticated tools to build relationships. Growth is actually designed around eliminating some of the stress of building relationships between teachers, because you do have a common struggle that you can combine on if you're not trying to tell people how to teach, but talking about how to know what you teach more deeply. And most people rally around that in a collaborative way. But if I try to tell you that you have to do your classroom this way, it's the quickest way to make an educator, especially one with a lot of expertise, angry and not listen to you. So I would never want to do that, and wouldn't want to build a relationship around that. If you can get in person, super valuable. But you can also do the growth framework exercises, and as we build out the parts of this over time with some of you, you can do that very well remotely. And there's a nice app on this interface, as well as Google Hangouts, that is a whiteboard that allows for these sort of interactions. And then you can do breakout rooms in Zoom and otherwise. You can, and we'll be happy to help if that's something that you decide to do. We'll be happy to help you set that up. But it's very important to try to build a rapport across grade bands for mathematics teaching, because if you don't, then how subtraction is talked about in the early grades may be a point of contention in later grades, for example, but you've never learned that, and you've never been able to solve a problem that exists without getting that information from the collaboration. It's not about finger pointing of the waterfall of education. I like to call the waterfall of blame is college professors blame high school teachers blame middle school teachers blame elementary, and elementary blames parents. Let's knock that off. There shouldn't be a waterfall of blame. There should be a collegial understanding of how we can solve issues that arise that are typical. And if we can build that together in a collegial way, then your people are solving the problems for your students and the kids in your community. And the equitable access to that type of math program will be very valuable to generations of young people.
Yeah, if you have other questions after the webinar, feel free to reply to the email that's sent to you, again, with the recordings. Once again, I want to appreciate the work that you're doing as educators, as professionals in the field. We're certainly here for you. And Kevin, thanks so much for sharing the growth framework with us today.
Absolutely. My pleasure. And hopefully we get a chance to meet and talk more. And if you have questions, please follow up. That's one of my favorite parts is talking more about how we can do this together.
All right. Thank you all.